Metroid is one of those franchises that has always been quietly loved but never really that popular. Since its inception in 1986, the series has garnered a tremendous amount of critical acclaim. I'd even go as far as to say that there are no bad games in this franchise, period. Some are certainly better than others, but I don't think the series has ever fared worse than slightly above average. Its influence on the industry also cannot be overlooked. After all, there aren't many franchises who can say they've had a whole genre named after them. Despite its acclaim and influence, however, the series has always struggled to achieve mainstream success, with most of the games sold modestly at best or bombing completely at worst. In nearly 40 years, Metroid has only ever achieved blockbuster status once, and that was with the original Metroid Prime. That is fitting though, as Metroid Prime is both the highest rated and best-selling game in the series, but also usher in Metroid's most prolific era. From 2002 to 2010, Nintendo actually viewed Metroid as a priority franchise alongside Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon, but all that momentum came to an end with Other M. While not a bad game, Other M rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way due to some... shall we say, questionable creative choices. Since then, Metroid has seen infrequent releases. There was the decent enough but ultimately forgettable Samus Returns, the overly hated but completely unnecessary Federation Force, and of course,
Metroid Dread! Oh my god!
The game no one thought they'd ever play. Among these games, however, there was one that has been missing in action for about 7 years now. Metroid Prime 4 was announced in 2017, and what would follow would be a whole lot of nothing. Well, almost nothing. We were updated on a few things. For reasons that early baffled me, Nintendo did not task Retro Studios with making Metroid Prime 4 in favor of Bandai Namco, something that was sort of a poor choice as they weren't the kind of studio who would excel with this type of game, and that turned out to be the case. At some point, Nintendo took a hard look at what Bandai Namco had done and were displeased with the progress, so Bandai Namco was pulled off the project and Retro Studios was told to get to work. Even then, we got next to nothing regarding the game until 2024. It was then that we started seeing gameplay footage and eventually a release date. Really, it had become something of a joke how long Metroid Prime 4 had been in production, but fans were excited nonetheless when the game finally came into view, especially considering how well Nintendo was doing with the Switch 2 at the time. However, when Metroid Prime 4 released at the end of 2025, it garnered a mixed reaction from fans and critics. Most agreed that while it was a decent game, they also felt that it wasn't worth the time they had to wait for it, among other things. Having just finished playing the game, I'm sort of in agreement. The Metroid Prime 4 is for sure a great game. By the standards of the franchise, it is pretty middle of the road. Beyond opens with the Galactic Federation research outpost being attacked by a band of space pirates led by rogue bounty hunter Silux. Samus happens to be nearby, so the Federation calls her to render aid. During the conflict, a relic is damaged, causing a rift to open, sucking Samus in and sending her to the mysterious planet of Viros. Samus finds that Viros exists somewhere outside of known space, and with her ship now light years away, Samus is all but stranded. However, she quickly discovers that Viros was once home to an advanced alien race that have long since died off, leaving behind their history and the means to get off-world via a teleporter. Seeing how it's the only viable way off of Viros, Samus sets off to find the means to activate the teleporter. Along the way, she discovers that several GF troopers have been teleported to Viros as well, meaning that for once, there are more people for Samus to save other than herself. Thankfully, the GEF troopers are down to help, and Samus is going to need it as it seems Silex is on the planet too, and somehow pulling the strings to hinder Samus in her quest. I have mixed opinions on the plot here. One of the things I've always praised about the original Metroid Prime was the story, or more specifically, how it was told. Metroid Prime had a very basic plot at face value. Samus had tracked Ridley to an uncharted planet and had to search the planet for him. However, it was a bit more nuanced than that. Through the use of the scan bars, you would find that the planet was once home to the Chozo, that they were killed off by a great disaster, the cause of which the space pirates have an interest in, and that they foresaw Samus' arrival, hence why they left weapons for her. Metroid Prime was a game that prided itself on its immersive gameplay, and this method of storytelling was a big part of that. It really made you feel like you were behind Samus' visor, uncovering the history as you hunted for your enemy. It was natural and organic in the best ways. Sadly, Retro was never able to achieve the same effect again. Echoes had a good idea for a story that could be told in this manner, but ultimately relied on more conventional means of storytelling, and by corruption, it had basically been abandoned. I was hoping that Beyond would return to that style of storytelling, but sadly that's not the case. Now, it's not to say that there isn't any history to uncover. There is, but the game still relies on stuff like cutscenes and dialogue in order to tell its story. So you get the gist of what's going on, even if you don't dig into the supplementary material. Not helping matters is the fact that Viros' story really isn't that interesting. Honestly, after a while, I had tuned out that part of the story and was focusing on other aspects of the narrative. Thankfully, those other aspects are pretty interesting. One of the more controversial aspects of Beyond is the fact that Samus isn't on her own this time. There are several other characters on the planet with her, which isn't a new thing. That was the case in Other M, which is probably why people were so up in arms when this was revealed. They probably thought Nintendo was repeating old mistakes. And I get that. One of the defining characteristics of the series is a sense of isolation, but you can only do that so many times before it gets stale. There's also something to be gained from having Samus interact with others, considering we are so used to seeing her on her own. Really, the concept of Samus having other people along for the adventure isn't bad in and of itself, it's just that the writing in Other M was awful. Samus was out of character, the GF troopers were of little note, and the ones that were of note weren't that likable, apart from Higgs, and they only served the purpose of degrading Samus as a character. There's a reason so many Metroid fans hate the plot of Other M, but again, just because it was bad in one story doesn't mean it will be bad in another, and it is not bad here. The GF troopers and Beyond are a delight by all accounts. They all have distinct personalities, they're all very likable, and they help out in ways that make sense for them. Be it providing technical support, providing some backup in combat, acting as an extra set of hands, or offering some muscle. More importantly, their interactions with Samus are beautifully written. One of the issues with the writing in Other M was that Samus was too quick to fall under the command of Adam, doing so on the grounds that she respected him as a commanding officer and a father figure, even though Adam, as he was portrayed in that game, was not worthy of that respect from Samus, even from the lesser version of Samus that game depicted. To address this, the writers made a point to not have any of the GF troopers barking orders at Samus. All of them clearly know who Samus is and respect her given her reputation, as well as the situation at hand. Rather than giving orders in the traditional sense, it comes off more as the characters giving their input as to what they think Samus should do based on information she is sharing with them, which is really clever. By the end of the game, you actually start to feel a sense of camaraderie amongst this group, and you want to see them make it home. However, there is this nagging sense that not everyone will make it home in the end, and I feel no one knows that better than Samus. I say this because whereas the GF troopers tend to be chatty, Samus herself remains silent for the whole game. Some people have complained about this, but I think it speaks to how Samus views the situation. Keep in mind, by this point, Samus has seen a lot of people meet their end, including GF troopers. When they are supposed to be on hand for one of Samus's adventures, they tend to not last too long. I feel like her not talking to them is a defense mechanism, her way of avoiding getting attached to them while also not giving them any false hope. Now, it's not to say that Samus doesn't want these people to survive, and she always makes it clear through her interactions with them that she is doing everything she can to get them home, but it's also clear that she is actively trying not to become close to any of them. I wish we could have heard Samus speak at least a few times here, but I think this choice does work. It certainly does better than...
A dream. I had been reliving the tragic moments of my recent past.
that. The most disappointing aspect of the game, though, is the villain. Since appearing in Metroid Prime Hunters, fans have been asking for Psylocke to make another appearance, and the announcement that he would be taking the role of main villain in this game was met with much enthusiasm. Then you start playing the game and realize that Psylocke is just kind of there. Despite being a bounty hunter, he's leading the space pirates and some evolved Metroids, who are never mentioned again, what's the point? And throughout most of the game, he's playing the villain at great distance. Really, this villain didn't need to be Psylocke. It could have been Dark Samus again, Ripley, or a completely new character. And it's a shame because I feel like Psylocke could have been far more interesting here. What I think would have been more interesting would be to portray him more as an antagonist than a villain. Have him basically be in the same situation as Samus and constantly picking fights with her, but maybe at some point realize that it would be best for him to team up with Samus to get home. Only for him to again turn on Samus due to his irrational hatred of her. I guess I'm thinking of something similar to how Shredder was portrayed in the 2012 version of TMNT, where his defining characteristic was his irrational hatred of Splinter, which led to a lot of self-destructive behavior. Given the backstory they present for Psylocke, I think that would have been brilliant, but instead, all we got is a villain who might as well be a new character. So yeah, there isn't much to talk about in regards to the story here. While I think Samus and her interactions with the GF troopers are fun, the lore of Viros is uninteresting, and Psylocke is completely wasted as a villain. Though Beyond has gotten a lot of mixed reactions, everyone seems to agree that this is a damn good looking game. Retro Studios have always been some of the best graphical artists in the industry, and they again work their magic here. The level themes are pretty basic for the series, they all feel unique enough and are often stunning to look at. I found that the areas had a tendency to change dynamically too. For example, when you get to Bolt Forge, the place is run down and fallen apart, but when you get the power going again, the place comes alive and you realize that it was a manufacturing plant where motorcycles are being built. This changes how you have to make your way through the level, which is great. Each area has a twist like this, and I think it's a good idea for a Metroidvania. It makes backtracking a bit more interesting. The performance is stellar too. It's important to note that I opted for the Switch 2 version of the game, which gives you some graphical options. You can play the game at 60 FPS at a high resolution, or you can play it at 120 FPS at a lower resolution. Personally, I went with the 60 FPS because I'm happy with that speed and I wanted the best picture quality, but it's also something I'm playing it at 120 FPS. From what I understand, the standard Switch version runs at the lower resolution of performance mode here, but at 60 FPS, so even I think that's acceptable and damn impressive. I'm surprised this game can run on a Switch 1 at all. The game looks great, but I don't know, there's something off about the way Samus moves here. There's just something oddly feminine about the way she carries herself. And I know Samus is a woman under all that armor, and I don't mind her showing her femininity. In fact, I really like when she does, but it just seems odd to me. I recall in older games, Samus always taken a more gender-neutral posture, with a wider stance and very heavy and deliberate footsteps. Makes a little more sense considering that, canonically, Samus makes an effort to hide her gender. Yeah, I know the Federation is obviously aware that Samus is a woman considering she was once a member of their ranks, but I don't see Samus abandoning that posture on their account. I have talked to some people about this to see if it was just me, and they didn't agree, so I'm going to write it off as a nitpick, but it still bugs me. The sound design is great though. The music is fantastic as always, able to be moody and atmospheric, but catchy and upbeat depending on what's going on. I especially like Sylux's theme, which is perfectly fitting for a duel between intergalactic bounty hunters. The voice acting is also really good. I'm glad Nintendo is finally starting to get this right, though they probably should look into hiring some better scriptwriters. Don't get me wrong, the script here isn't bad at all, but it could be a tad sloppy at times. Sound effects are pretty mixed though. All the iconic ones are still here, but the weapons feel a little on the weak side. I don't know what it is, but it's just never been that fun to blast stuff in the Prime series, and this is no different. It's a fantastic looking game by all accounts. I'm so glad Retro got a chance to work on this. I shudder to imagine what the game would have looked like under Bandai Namco. Beyond is a Metroidvania, but it sadly goes for a beginner-friendly setup as opposed to a straight one. Rather than just dropping you into Viros and just saying go, you are frequently given directions as to where to go. Now it's not to say that you aren't given room to explore, they show you where to go but not how to get there after all, but I was hoping they would have gone for a more straightforward Metroidvania. I'm not going to hold it against the game too much though, because that is where Retro Studios was with the series last time they worked on it, and because it still works just fine here, about as well as it did in Metroid Fusion and Corruption. It also helps that the gameplay is pretty well polished. The game supports two control schemes. One is a traditional dual analog control, and honestly I didn't like it. This is primarily because the game still features a lot of the same design from Corruption, so when you lock onto an enemy you won't just have to keep shooting, you often have to shoot in and around the target. Doing so with gyro controls and the analog stick is a little awkward, so I ended up going with the other control scheme, which is full-on motion controls, just like what you had in Corruption as a matter of fact. I was a little concerned by this because I found the motion controls didn't really work all that well in Metroid Prime Remastered, but surprisingly, they functioned perfectly here. I guess Retro took the time to make it work because it feels just like I was playing Metroid Prime on the Wii again, which is still my preferred way to play these games, even now that we have the remastered version. You even have the option to play the game with mouse controls, which is pretty neat. I know there are some people who are going to complain about this because God forbid you use anything other than your thumbs to play a game, but I think the controls work just fine here. I never had a problem as I was playing. Part of the reason it still works is because the sense of progression that Metroid is known for is still present and accounted for. Though a lot of the power-ups you get throughout the game are pretty familiar, the pace at which you get them is pretty on point. It always feels like the game is evolving, which is exactly what you want in a game like this. There are some cool new abilities as well. The sidekick beam is pretty cool, for instance. It's basically a remote shot that you can guide, but when you fire it, time stops, allowing you to take out multiple targets that would otherwise regenerate too fast. The sidekick grappler is also pretty cool and makes for some fun mobility. Outside of that though, it all feels pretty typical. I was also a little disappointed at the lack of visors. All you get is a psychic visor, which is basically just a scan visor. Really, the whole psychic angle they go with here is pretty uninspired. Yeah, you have some telekinetics and stuff like that, but it's very limited and mostly relegated to interacting with stuff like doors and some basic puzzle elements. How cool would it have been to have actual telekinesis, like in Dead Space, and get new powers as the game goes on? This sort of applies to the combat as well, which is about as bland as it typically is. I mean, it's not bad, and it is for the most part stimulating since it's projectile based as opposed to hit scan, but you use a lot of the same tactics throughout the game. Lots of blasting, a charge shot here, a missile there. There's not much outside of that. I was hoping you'd have different beams with different strengths and weaknesses, but instead you have elemental shots, which aren't that useful outside of opening doors and clearing certain obstacles. I think the enemy variety might be lower here too. Seems like you mostly fight these security bots or these aliens here. Not much else. At the very least, the boss fights are still creative and fun. I especially enjoy the fights with Silos, which do a great job making use of all the different abilities you get throughout the game. It might seem like Beyond didn't really impress me, and yeah, honestly it didn't. Don't get me wrong, I was having fun as I was playing, but it honestly felt like I was playing Corruption again. It didn't seem like much had been improved or made worse, though there is one thing that I'd say actively hurts the game, and that's the game's newest feature, the open world gameplay. You see, rather than exploring one big map, the game is structured more like Corruption in that you have several smaller maps to explore. However, whereas in Corruption you had to use Samus's ship to fly between the levels, here the levels are separated by a big open desert that you cross via a motorcycle. A big, open, empty desert. Yeah, the open world gameplay here is shit. Though there is stuff to see and do out in the desert, it's very minor stuff that I think most would ignore, and given the design of the map, you'll likely just be driving straight across it. Seriously, this is what I was doing for most of my time out in the desert, riding in a straight line across sand dunes and occasionally fighting off unthreatening enemies. I swear, this makes Mad Max look like a competent open world game. It's extremely boring, and I often wondered why Retro even bothered. Actually, I know why they bothered, because this actually isn't a bad idea for a Metroid game. I actually do like the idea of adding some open world elements to Metroid, but in a manner that feels a bit more unique. Recall in Jak 3 how you venture out into the desert via dune buggies, and you couldn't reach certain parts of the map until you unlocked a certain dune buggy? I think applying that logic to Metroid would have been cool. You know, give your motorcycle the ability to jump, run on walls, and all kinds of other stuff. That way the open world would slowly become more accessible as the game goes on. And I think that is what Retro had in mind, because you do get an upgrade like that at some point, but it's the only time in the game that occurs. I don't know why they didn't go further with that. Considering how long Metroid Prime 4 was in production, I was under the impression that Retro had started from scratch, but now I'm wondering if they spent the last couple of years cleaning up after Bandai Namco. This lazy open world design seems like it's something a company like that would do, but as of now, I have no confirmation of that. It does hurt the game a good bit though. I've always said that in order for an open world game to work, you need to enjoy being out in the open world. You know, never have a desire to use the fast travel. Well, Beyond's open world gameplay is so far removed from that. It's so bad you are actually begging for a fast travel system. Now, it's not to say that Beyond is bad per se. The game is still fine with good pacing, polished controls, and all that good stuff, but the open world gameplay, yeah, that needed a lot more work. I found Beyond to be a pretty comfy experience. The general gameplay was pretty easy, the boss fights gave me some trouble, but never to a frustrating degree. The game kept moving at a great pace. That is until they hit you with this.
You did it! You found all the teleporter keys. I wonder if I can find a solution for Chrono Tower's force field with Federation tech. Want to check the Galfed debris in Soul Valley? See if you can find anything useful? Also, how you doing with the hunt for green energy crystals? Don't forget to bring the green energy crystals to the altar in Fury Green so you can grow the memory for it. Fuck!
My thoughts exactly, Roy. When I hit this part, my heart sank because I knew I had just hit an arbitrary roadblock before reaching the end of the game. In other words, the artifact hunt from Prime and Echoes. Granted, it's not as bad here as you mostly just have to do some work out in the desert, but it still takes a lot of time to get it done. I also find it annoying that they didn't clue me into it earlier. I mean, I became aware of the Met parts early on in the game, but had no idea what I was supposed to do to collect them. I actually had to look that up, which is annoying. Then there's the knowledge fruit, which I don't think was even mentioned until the end of the game. Some better writing and design could have alleviated this issue, but instead, you gotta deal with this crap. Enough with the fucking artifact hunts! Beyond clocked in at about 10 to 12 hours, and upon seeing my completion screen, I found that there was a lot of scanning and secondary items to find, so there was some replay value here. All that's in addition to the unlockable hard mode as well. Typically I would be okay with this length, but we are still engaged in some idiot stupid trade war.
Hey, relax, guy.
So prices are still high for Switch 2 games. I was hoping they would have dropped by now, but I guess that was wishful thinking. And unlike Bonanza, I can't say that Beyond justifies its price tag, at least on Switch 2. The Switch version goes for $60, which is actually what I would recommend. Yeah, the image won't be as crisp and it won't run at 120 FPS, but the game is still all there, so it's fine. Get it at 60, and if you like it, buy the Switch 2 upgrade when you decide to pick it up later in the future. On the side note, Nintendo, if you want to charge $90 for your games, no paid DLC. That Bonanza DLC should have been free to everyone, or at the very least, for Switch Online subscribers. There isn't really anything wrong with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but it just sort of is. Make no mistake, Beyond is a very well made game. The characterization is top notch, the presentation is outstanding, and the gameplay is polished to a mere gleam. However, this is a case where the pros just don't completely outweigh the cons. While the characterization is great, the story itself is forgettable. While the presentation is exceptional, to see them at their best, you have to pay a premium that simply isn't worth it. And even though the gameplay is as polished as it can be, it is pretty typical for the Prime series, and anything new that it tries just doesn't work that well. Metroid Prime 4 is just okay. It's nowhere near as bad as a lot of people have made it out to be, but it's nowhere near as good as fanboys have made it out to be. I would still recommend this to fans of the franchise, but new players would be much better off picking up Metroid Prime Remastered. It pains me to say that because I can tell Retro Studios went above and beyond to get this game made, but the final product simply doesn't fly quite as high.